They left her to die in the cold, a child dragged from a burning hall, wrapped in rags, and forgotten at the edge of a frost-bitten road, while the lords inside toasted her oblivion. By the time spring thinned the ice, rumor had already reshaped her into something smaller, a footnote, a scandal, a convenient silence for those who'd profited from her erasure. Years later, she returned, not with curses or monsters, but with a ledger of debts, a network of ruined men's secrets, and a calm that cut straighter than any sword. She had learned how power really moved, through grain stores, marriage contracts, and whispered promises in candlelit cellars, and she wielded that knowledge with a patience that made kings rearrange their thrones. The same cold that almost killed her had taught her to see people's weaknesses as maps, and when she set those maps down on the table, alliances shifted and collars loosened. This is a story of a woman turned into a weapon by survival, and of a court that mistook mercy for weakness. If you want the whole truth behind the betrayal, the bargains, and the rise that frightened an empire, subscribe now, and don't miss what happens next. They had called her Alina of Varyn, though in truth, she had no lands left to claim. Her father's estate had been divided like carrion among vultures after his execution for treason, a crime forged by signatures that now lined the pockets of courtiers. On a winter's night, as soldiers dragged her from her home, she remembered her mother's last whisper, "Survive long enough to be forgotten." And so she did. The girl who was left to die in the snow grew into a woman hidden in the corners of foreign courts. A laundress here, a scribe's assistant there, always listening, always learning. She discovered that true power did not shout. It murmured, just loud enough for the right ears. She watched how men destroyed each other, not with blades, but with rumors, letters, and debts. By the time she returned to Varyn 15 years later, the kingdom had changed, and yet it had not changed at all. The same banners flew, the same noble families smiled their rehearsed smiles, the same men who had condemned her father now governed with trembling hands. They did not recognize her when she stepped through the gates of the capital. Why would they? To them, Alina of Varyn had frozen to death long ago. She arrived under a new name, Lady Alice of Corvin. Her dress was modest, her accent softened by travel, her hands gloved to hide the faint burn scars from that night. She came with no claim, no army, only knowledge. She had spent years in exile tracing how silver moved through the kingdom's veins, which merchants bribed which officials, whose sons were being educated abroad with embezzled funds, whose estates stood mortgaged to foreign creditors. She carried these secrets in coded letters sewn into her hems. Every piece of information was a weapon, and she knew when to unsheathe each one. At first, she was dismissed, a foreign widow with quiet manners and sharper eyes than politeness allowed. But within months, invitations arrived. Her counsel was sought on trade disputes, her insights whispered in the corridors of the royal court. She became a shadow advisor, never standing too close to the throne, yet always near enough that her absence was felt. What unsettled everyone was her calm. She neither flattered nor threatened, but when she spoke, people listened. She could make a lord feel as though revealing his secret was his own idea. She offered comfort, like poison in honey, sweet, warm, and impossible to refuse. And then came the night that changed everything. At a royal banquet held to celebrate the king's 50th year on the throne, the court, gathered under chandeliers of crystal and gold. Alina, still known to all as Lady Alice, sat near the back, dressed in muted silk, unnoticed. The hall brimmed with laughter and false joy, yet beneath it was the hum of unease. The treasury was failing. Famine whispered at the borders. Midway through the feast, a courier arrived, breathless and pale. He knelt before the dais, handed a sealed parchment to the chancellor, and stepped back. The chancellor's eyes scanned the document, then froze. A murmur spread as he whispered into the king's ear. The king's face turned ashen. The music faltered. Then, without warning, the chancellor collapsed forward, blood seeping between his fingers. Poison! Panic surged through the room. Goblets were overturned. Noble women screamed. Guards drew swords. And through the chaos, Alina rose slowly from her seat. Her eyes met the king's, and in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition. The guards detained half the hall, searching for the source of the poison. Accusations flew like arrows, but no one thought to question the quiet widow who had poured no wine, who had touched no food not served to her. That night, as the palace sealed itself in fear, Alina walked calmly to her rented chambers in the city. There, beneath her bed, she unlocked a small chest. Inside were parchment records, correspondence, debt ledgers, signatures. At the very top lay a confession written years ago, bearing the seal of the very chancellor who had died that evening. It named every man involved in her father's execution. The poison had not been for revenge. It had been for silence. The chancellor had written the confession in a moment of guilt, but his repentance had a price. As dawn bled across the city walls, word spread that the chancellor's death had uncovered new truth. The king ordered an inquiry. Names resurfaced, names once buried, and when the royal investigator asked for assistance, it was Lady Alice, whom the king quietly summoned. When she entered the throne room that morning, the king's voice trembled slightly as he greeted her. "You seem to know much about the ghosts of this court," he said. She smiled faintly. "Only the ones who refuse to stay buried." And as he studied her face, something familiar in her eyes, a flicker of recognition crossed him. But before he could speak, a messenger entered the room with urgent news. The investigator assigned to the case had been found dead in his quarters. A single sheet of parchment lay beside him, blank, save for one line written in careful ink. "The one you fear most has already been among you." The death of the royal investigator ignited panic in the palace. Whispers filled the corridors of betrayal, of vengeance, of hidden hands moving within the court. The king's advisors urged him to tighten his circle, to trust no one, not even those closest to him. And yet, amidst the storm, there was one face he continued to summon: Lady Alice of Varyn. Alina had become indispensable. She handled matters discreetly, avoided public favor, and spoke with a precision that made men feel safe, even as they unknowingly bled information into her grasp. The king valued her counsel more than that of his oldest allies. He often said she reminded him of a time when his decisions were clearer, when loyalty meant something. He didn't realize that loyalty was the very thread she was unraveling. Each night, Alina returned to her modest chambers and spread out her notes like a general studying a battlefield. Every alliance, every secret transaction, every promise made in desperation was documented. She had built a map of power that stretched from the palace gates to the farthest province. And at the center of that web sat the king himself. The deeper she dug, the clearer it became. Her father's execution had not been ordered out of justice, but convenience. His loyalty to the crown had become a threat, once he discovered the king's secret trade with foreign merchants. Trade that had drained the treasury while the people starved. The chancellor and several nobles had framed him, signing false documents that accused him of treason to protect their own corruption. The king had signed the order without reading it, trusting the very men who profited from the lie. Alina no longer wanted vengeance. What she wanted was justice, the kind that would strip the guilty of their dignity, not their lives. Her first strike was quiet. She anonymously sent letters to the lesser lords, revealing fragments of the truth, small enough to cause doubt, large enough to sow distrust. Within weeks, old alliances began to crumble. Accusations surfaced in council meetings. The nobles turned on one another, afraid of what secrets might emerge next. The king, exhausted by the chaos, relied even more on her. "You see clearly when others see fog," he told her once, his voice heavy with weary admiration. She met his gaze and replied softly, "Fog only hides what men are too afraid to face." Then one evening, as snow began to fall over the capital, the same season she had once been left to die, she received an unexpected visitor. It was the king's youngest son, Prince Thomas. Unlike his father, Thomas was observant, sharp-eyed, and suspicious by nature. He had been studying her movements, her correspondences, her quiet influence over the king's decisions. And now he stood in her doorway, hands clasped behind his back, his voice calm but edged. "You're not who you claim to be," he said. "I found the record of Lady Alice of Corvin's death 10 years before you ever appeared in this kingdom." Alina's pulse steadied. "Then who do you believe I am?" "I believe," Thomas said, stepping closer, "you are the daughter of Lord Varyn, the traitor my father condemned." The silence between them was sharp as glass. Alina didn't deny it. She didn't need to. Her stillness was admission enough. The prince exhaled slowly. "I should expose you, but something tells me your truth may serve a greater purpose." He glanced toward the palace windows. "This kingdom is rotting from within. Perhaps it deserves to face what it has buried." For the first time in years, Alina felt something unexpected, the faint echo of trust. Together they began to plan what she had long awaited, a reckoning not by sword, but by truth. Over the next month, carefully gathered documents were copied, coded, and smuggled into the city's printing houses. When dawn came on the first day of spring, broadsheets appeared in every market, every tavern, every church courtyard. They bore the royal seal, and beneath it, evidence of the corruption that had plagued the court for decades. Letters signed by the dead chancellor, records of bribes, trade contracts that bore the king's name. The kingdom erupted. The people demanded answers. Nobles fled the capital under disguise. Others barricaded themselves in their estates. The king, shaken and humiliated, summoned Lady Alice in secret. "You've destroyed everything I built," he said bitterly. "Do you think this chaos is justice?" Alina looked at him, the man who had once signed her father's death warrant without even reading it. "No," she said quietly. "This is truth. Justice comes after." He stared at her for a long moment, realization dawning like a wound reopening. "It was you," he whispered, "Varyn's daughter." Before he could summon the guards, the doors burst open. Prince Thomas entered, holding a letter sealed with the crest of the council. "Father," he said, "the council has voted. You are to abdicate. The kingdom will not follow a king who built his reign on lies." The king's eyes filled with disbelief and fear. For the first time, Alina saw him as he truly was. Not a tyrant, but a man trapped by his own cowardice. Days later, the palace was quiet. Snow melted into the cobblestones, and banners of a new regency fluttered in the cold wind. Alina stood on the same hill where she had once been abandoned as a child. Below, the city thrived again, free but forever scarred. Prince Thomas had kept his word. The kingdom began to rebuild, not perfectly, but honestly. And Alina disappeared once more, leaving behind only her name, written in the margins of those documents that had changed history. Years later, a scholar studying the records of Varyn found a note in faded ink beside her father's old seal. "They left me to die in the cold, but I learned to make winter my ally. Power, when stolen through deceit, always devours its thief." Alina's story reminds us that truth, though slow, cuts deeper than vengeance ever could. If you believe forgotten stories like hers deserve to be told, subscribe to our channel and help us uncover the truths that shaped the world we live in.